Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this panel on Dr. Halperin's new book, Hope and Contemporary Israeli Peace Movements, the Emotional Dimension of Collective Peace Politics, which I have right here, and it's a great book, and I highly recommend it. I'm so glad to have the opportunity to chair this panel and celebrate the book. We will have 3 speakers to talk about it, one of whom unfortunately could not be here in person, but he did send some recorded remarks, which we will watch together. And it's wonderful to have Dr. Halperin here as well to share some of her reactions. Writing an academic book, as some of you know, is a challenge even in normal times, but to be able to write one in such turbulent times and on a topic of hope and peace, no less, is really a remarkable feat. And I want to congratulate Liv on this achievement. For the benefit of those who have not yet read the book, I wanted to begin, before turning it over to the speakers, with offering just a brief overview, a brief synopsis of what the book is about. The book is a study of 2 contemporary Israeli peace movements, Standing Together, Omdim Beyachad, and Women Wage Peace, Nashim Osot Shalom. Both of these movements were founded in the last decade, at a time when the prospect of peace with the Palestinians had largely disappeared from mainstream Israeli political discourse. The book draws on qualitative fieldwork, including many interviews with activists, ethnographic fieldwork and participant observation, an analysis of documentary and visual materials. And Dr. Halperin examines how these 2 movements came to place hope at the center of their language, practices, and organizing, even as the political environment was increasingly marked by frustration, cynicism, and despair. The book begins by situating these movements historically in relation to earlier generations of Israeli peace activism, including anti-occupation activism and women's peace movements. Then the first empirical chapter focuses on Standing Together, which was founded in 2015 as a Jewish-Arab mixed-gender movement. Liv presents it as a movement that began with anti-occupation and pro-peace commitments, but quickly expanded into a broader project linking peace to equality, social justice, labor rights, climate justice, and other struggles through what she terms an intersectional approach. The next chapter then turns to Women Wage Peace. The movement was founded in 2014 by Israeli women who wanted to prevent future wars and bring women into the conversation about peace and security. Liv shows how Women Wage Peace developed a different organizational and political style from Standing Together. It defines itself as a broad, women-led, nonpartisan, and inclusive movement of women from different political camps, diverse social locations, all united by the desire for peace. The chapter also emphasizes the movement's gendered and maternal language, its inclusive style, and its emphasis on positive forms of activism. So these groups differ, but she also shows how they've collaborated, especially in recent years. After these 2 chapters, the book turns more directly to discussing hope itself, asking what hope means for Israeli peace activists. The book argues that in a political climate where peace appears so distant, hope is cultivated not merely as a means to an end, but as an end in itself. It is an attachment to a political vision that once felt more possible. It's a capacity to imagine positive change and an almost tangible substance, a spiritual or existential resource. More generally, it is something that activists need in order to keep acting, to avoid despair, cynicism, resignation, or apathy. As one of the activists note, it's like air and water. It's necessary in order to breathe. The following chapter asks how the 2 movements themselves generate hope, using what she refers to as hope-related emotion work, in which movements try to produce collective hope among activists and also among the broader public. Both Standing Together and Women Wage Peace deliberately use the language of hope, but they do so in different ways in accordance with their own politics and styles. Standing Together connects hope to struggle, power, solidarity, Jewish-Arab partnership, and to the building of a shared political alternative. Women Wage Peace connects hope to home, heart, body, care, sisterhood, and positive emotional language. Standing Together combines hope with anger and struggle, Women Wage Peace tries to cultivate hope together with care, love, joy, and empathy. And it's wonderful to see representative of both these movements here, which I also know from the book are marked by their dress. In the case of women, they're white and turquoise, which is, it does cultivate a certain hope and positivity, I agree. And of course, we're discussing this book as sort of Liv wraps up in her conclusion at a particularly dark moment in the history of these two peoples after almost 1,000 days of bloodshed, of grief, of fear. And the prospect of peace for many of us seems farther than ever. But this book reminds us that even within such darkness, activists continue to work to generate and create light, hope, and positivity. And as we approach national elections, in which Standing Together announced recently that it will be competing as a political party, the language of hope and positivity becomes even more crucial, as Liv explains, as a generative, mobilizing, crucial practice. So that's sort of an overview, which hopefully gives you a taste for the book and a desire to read it in full. We're very lucky to have a wonderful group of speakers here with us to help us think through the book's arguments and its implications. Our first speaker will be Professor Ayelet Harel of the Conflict Management and Resolution Program in the Department of Politics and Government at Ben-Gurion University, where she also serves as the Vice Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Social Science. Together with Dr. Saraya Aroni, Ayelet advised the PhD dissertation, which ultimately became this book, and I'm happy to invite you to start us out. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dvora, for the kind introduction. I have to say I'm very excited, because there in the academia, most of the time we present our own research, and now I feel like a grandmother going to a bat mitzvah or bar mitzvah of a grandson, because my PhD student concluded her study and created a wonderful book. So together with Saraya Aroni, we advised Lee, which is a brilliant scholar. And I would like to say a few words about the book. And also I would say that I have such brilliant colleagues around me that will, assisted me in the past few years to keep some hope. So we saw in the previous panel, and we saw Tal Nitzan, that is always organizing us such wonderful events that will at least talking about hope and about peace. So thank you so much. So I wrote a few points that I would like to emphasize. I will not talk about the entire book, but I would like to emphasize like a few points that I picked. And I think that one of the most interesting thing in the book is listening and thinking of hope in plural, and about not like fighting of what is the right way to do something, right? Now we all think the elections is coming like in a few months, and there always the discussion, okay, should I vote to a small party? Should I vote to a large party? Should I compromise and do something strategically, and so on and so forth? And I think it is true in the political level, speaking about parties and who am I going to vote to. And also this is true when it comes to these organizations. Always there's the discussion of what is the right way to do things, to be a little bit more smooth or friendly, to be more stubborn, to be more concise, to be more general in my ideas or whatever. And I think this issue is very, very important these days. So I think that one of the book's most important scholarly contribution, it's an insistence to treating emotions as object of strategic construction. And I think that Halperin's concept of emotion work, the deliberate, organized, institutionalized efforts by movements to produce collective hope, challenges both classical resource mobilization framework and more recent discursive approaches to social movements. And by showing that hope is not simply there, waiting to be channeled, it is actively manufactured through slogans, training programs, grassroots actions, music, caring practices, and international comparisons. The book makes a serious empirical contribution to the sociology of emotions in collective action. And also it is worth highlighting that the book is actually about the politics of hope production, which is genuinely analytical framework, original analytical framework, hence the theoretical contribution of the book. And we can ask what kind of hope are being produced, by whom, and through which political imaginaries. And the answer is that hope itself is plural. Different movements in Israel create different emotional pathways toward political engagement. And I think that Halperin draws productively on Jasper's concept on moral battery to distinguish between standing together combination of hope and anger from women's way peach, inclusive resilience and let's say reliance on positive emotions. And this is one of the most interesting empirical findings. And it has direct implications of the theory of movement effectiveness. Let's say I wrote so many things, I need to skip some of it, but I think that both movements, as Liv is writing, construct communities of belonging as a mechanism for generating hope, but they do so in a very different way and with very different inclusionary and exclusionary effect. Halperin is admirably honest about the paradox she uncovers. Women wage peace, warm, welcoming atmosphere and sense of sisterhood is partly a conduct of its reliance on relative demographic homogeneity, predominantly middle-class Ashkenazi Jewish women. The sisterhood is real, but is not genuinely intersectional one. The book invites a broader theoretical discussion about the relationship between effectively community building and political reach. Movements that generate the strongest sense of belonging may do so precisely because they are less diverse. This is a genuine tension in social movement theory, not just a critique of women wage peace, just a question that should be asked. And I think that one of the most important contributions of Liv's work, as I said, is that it reads hope as political labor. And in a context where many people perceive the conflict as unsolvable, hope does not emerge naturally. It has to be cultivated, performed, narrated, and sustained through collective action. This insight is particularly valuable, particularly today, when despair itself has become a powerful political force. And why this matters even more after October 7, I think that we shouldn't be surprised to hear that there's so much disappointment from the state, from the military, from state institution. I think that we can also mention what was mentioned briefly in the previous panels, and maybe the first one, about moral trauma. Not just moral injury about what's happening towards the Palestinian side, but also moral trauma of disappointment and sense of betrayal of those who are responsible of taking care of us, of leading the country, of keeping the security and keeping everything in place. And here we need to find people, organizations that are genuinely striving for peace, for a better life, for hope. And it is how hope survives trauma. And I think that now this is particularly important because I think that the last 3 years were even worse than what we experienced before. It is much worse, and therefore the study is even more important today than ever. So the book captures something historically important, the emotional and political resources that existed before the war and that continue to shape civic responsiveness afterwards. As someone currently studying whose knowledge is recognized and whose knowledge is not receiving sufficient weight with security institutions, the frontline war rooms, the spotters, field observers, that's ותנועות, as we say, I was struck by a parallel question running through this book. Leave examines actors who often occupy the margins of mainstream political discourse, yet continue to produce ideas, practices, and visions of the future. The book reminds us that political significance is not always measured by immediate policy influence. Sometimes it lies in preserving alternative possibilities and putting the seeds inside. And I'm looking at all of you women WHPs here sitting next to me. And I think that even if there are no immediate changes or immediate policy influence, sometimes it lies in preserving alternative possibilities in mind when dominant narrative insists that no alternatives exist. To sum up, what makes this book especially valuable is that it does not ask whether hope is justified or not. It asks how hope is socially produced, politically sustained, and collectively experienced under conditions that appear profoundly hopeless. At a moment where many societies are struggling with polarization, trauma, and political fatigue, that is an important question far beyond the Israeli-Palestinian case, and I think that this book should be read all over globally. I think that if I want to say one last sentence about the book is that not just about the empirical finding and theoretical finding, I think that the methodologically it's rigorous, it's fantastic, and it's a must read, and I'm very, very proud of you, so thank you.
Okay. So our second speaker is Professor Dani Filk, also of the Department of Politics and Government at Ben-Gurion University, and in here also as in his capacity as one of the founders of Standing Together. Unfortunately, he was called away abroad just shortly before the panel, but he was kind enough to send recorded remarks, which we will attempt to hear now.
Hi, I want first to apologize for not being able to, due to family reasons, I had to travel from Israel and I am not able to participate with you. And I want to thank Dvora and Tal, first from inviting me to be part of the panel and then for allowing me to, in some way, be part of it. I want to congratulate and see how happy I am that this panel is taking place and this discussion is taking place, but most of all, the fact that Liv's wonderful book has been published. I will talk today not as an academic, but as a member, founding member of Standing Together, one of a relatively small group that were there when we began Standing Together and are still here. And from that, for me, a book as Liv's is very important because she combines some more zoom out perspective than people like myself that are immersed in the activity of Omdim Beyachad. And so we lack the perspective to evaluate, but hers is an empathic externality. She has been part of several activities, either the National Assembly, demonstrations, and other circus meetings. And so she knows very well the movement, and she has an empathic approach to the movement, but also the perspective of somebody who is not a full-blown member, and I at least can say that I learned a lot. Liv's book asks three very relevant and important questions. The first one is why hope? The second one, what are we talking about when we talk about hope? And the third one is how hope is being promoted. In that sense, I would say that the chapter that I think I learned the most is the fifth chapter, when she discusses the ways in which both movements promote hope and instrumentalize hope. And once again, I'm speaking from the perspective of עומדים ביחד. And the first point is making hope implicit. And in that sense, when we began the movement, we were aware that one of the main problems of the peace camp in Israel, or the center left and left, is despair, especially after the 2015 elections, that there was some kind of hope that Netanyahu lost the elections, and when he won, a black cloud of despair involved the whole camp, and we are convinced that despair is an ally of the status quo. It's an ally of the status quo because despair leads usually to one of two alternatives. One is abandoning the public sphere, searching refuge in the private, and the private is important, the personal is politic, but still when you abandon the public sphere, in fact, you become a part of the status quo. The second point is, or the second alternative, cynicism, and cynicism is always conservative, and conservatism is a defense of the status quo. So we knew that any possible alternative to the government of the right that was becoming more and more radical was presenting an alternative both to the vision of the right, but also to the discourse of despair, and hope is the alternative. Liv speaks about intersectionality. I would speak about it a little bit later, but we speak more about hegemonic politics, even though there are some commonalities between both. The link between struggle and hope, the slogan of the movement, the first slogan is איפה שיש מאבק יש תקווה. תקווה, and I want to tell you about a conversation we had a couple of weeks ago, speaking about the need to create and promote a collective culture, a point that Liv raises in her book. And one of the persons that was part of the discussion said that we can't speak only about איפה שיש מאבק, יש תקווה, when there is struggle, there is hope, but also איפה שיש תקווה, יש מאבק, where there is hope, there is struggle. So there is a kind of dialectic relationship between both. The idea of solidarity and linking between the interests of different social groups. Liv calls that intersectionality of struggles. I would use I'm coming from different theoretical perspectives, so in my I completely understand Liv's view, and I would add to that view Ernesto Laclau's idea of a chain of equivalences between different claims put forward by different social groups, and the possibility that in a kind of transitivity, the different claims are united in a chain of equivalences that divides the social the social camp between we the people and they, the powers that be. And that's one of the ideas that we try to do. We are speaking about polarizing differently, where the right polarizes between the good Jews and the non-Jews allied to the bad Jews who are traitors. We want to polarize differently. So positive thinking is another point that Liv raises, and also the idea of hope as a quasi-religious situation or belief. And some thinking about the point, it's true that many of us in standing together in Omdim Beyachad, we come, or at least among the founders of Omdim Beyachad, we come from different socialist traditions, socialist and communist traditions that are linked to the Marxist view of history as the expression of necessity, of one with a clear direction, where the coming of socialism and communism are an historical necessity, and liberty as the consciousness of that necessity. So there is a religious, maybe background there, but I think most of us, I can say it for sure about me, we left this belief in the unidirection of history many years ago. And I think that in that sense, we would say that it's not hope as like the messianic belief, or the belief that the messiahs will come, and Mashiach bo yavo, but the idea that it's a kind of empirical grounded hope, or at least the claim that in the same way that people can claim that there is empirical ground for despair because the situation is bad and it's very, very bad, we claim that there are also empirical grounds to hope that change is possible. And in that sense, my feeling, and maybe I'm wrong about that Liv was a little critical of optimism, and she put the idea of radical and authentic hope as different from naive optimism. So I will go back in a minute to the idea of radical hope and authentic hope, but I would claim that I would argue for a different definition of optimism. I wouldn't say that optimism is the belief that things will become good for sure, and for sure not the Voltairean candid idea that we live in the best of all possible worlds. I would say that optimism nowadays is arguing that history is open. In the same way that we can't claim, as Marxists did in the past, that history has a telos and that we are advancing towards a future where everything will be a kind of paradise in earth. In the same way, we can't claim for sure that what it is what will be, or that things will be even worse than today. The idea that there is some kind of historical necessity or historical security, I think it's wrong. And in my way, optimism is the claim that history is open, that human agency, and especially collective agency, is able to influence history. So in that sense, is if you want, a non-naive kind of optimism. Here, it links with some questions that Liv's book raises, and a good book, I think, is a book that is able to raise questions. So the first question is, what kind of, for me, is what is radical hope? Liv, if I understand her correctly, considers that radical and authentic hope is a hope that aims to save what is possible to save. Maybe because I'm an optimist, but I think that it's a kind of not enough radical idea of hope to save what is possible to save. I think that radical hope is the belief that what today seems impossible could be possible. That is radical hope. Not that it will for sure be possible, but that it could be possible. Once again, radical hope is the idea that history is open to human agency. So in a way, active hope, the third dimension that Liv emphasizes, I think that there is a link between radical and active hope, but radical not as saving what you can, but radical as a real alternative. Now, the last point, because I don't want to take too much of your time, is one of the tensions that is less present in the book, but I wanted to put forward is because another important aspect about Omdim Beyachad is the idea of a popular left, small amami, as different from the liberal left. And Liv does mention in her book the tensions within Omdim Beyachad around the term the people, around the term Am. She quotes to members, to activists, Or and Omar, who point to the difficulty to use the term people in a Jewish Arab movement, since people is much more associated with the Palestinian people or the Jewish people. And it is a real challenge, a challenge that we are not always able to address correctly, but it's still an important part of our worldview. After October 7th and the terrible war in Gaza, things have been more difficult in that sense. The tension between the fact that today fighting against the occupation, against the eternal war that the right-wing government wants, and for a just peace between Israelis and Palestinians. This is the main challenge for our movements and for our society. But still, how you do that in a way that it still remembers true to the idea of a popular left, that is a real challenge and that we try to cope with every day, sometimes with a little bit more success, sometimes going 2 steps back and only 1 forward. And my last point is that we are not doing what we do for the individual pleasure to tell our grandchildren in another 20 years, we did what we had to do in those days. No, we are not doing what we do in order not to be charged of being on the wrong side in another 10 or 20 years. We are doing what we do because in order to change, we must do what we do. We do what we do because we believe that collective action may change things. We have no guarantee, but we don't have any guarantee that change is impossible. So once again, Thank you, Dvora and Tal. Thank you mostly, Liv, for the wonderful book you wrote. And also thank you, Ayelet and Sarai, for your tutoring, because this book is also the result of Liv's PhD.
Thank you. Okay, so our third speaker is Dr. Yael Ladmi, a peace activist, co-founder and chairperson of Women Wage Peace, a former AI executive with PhD in ethics. She is currently leading joint Israeli-Palestinian initiatives with Women of the Sun to advance peace, equality, and security for all. Thank you.
טוב, אז קודם כל, קרה לי נס היום. אחרי שבלילה כתבתי הכל באנגלית, כי אנגלית תמיד מלחיץ אותי, קיבלתי מתנה, אז תודה. אני יודעת שיש סיכוי שלא כל העולם ישמע ויבין, אבל נראה לי שעכשיו יותר חשוב, כן, נראה לי שעכשיו יותר חשוב לדבר פה אלינו, וזה כמובן הולך לי הרבה יותר בקלות. אז קודם כל תודה. תודה לך ליב, תודה לך ילד, תודה לך טל, על הדבר הנפלא הזה שגרם לכולנו להיות פה היום, והספר ששם מונח לי היה פשוט עונג לקרוא אותו, כי קרה עוד משהו שאולי ברשימות של איך מייצרים תקווה, זה פשוט להסתכל על דברים שעשיתם והייתם ולקחתם חלק, ופתאום אתה אומר, וואו, זה תהליך ממש נחמד. היה לנו משהו דומה כזה שדיברנו עם אחת המעצבות שלנו שעושה וזה, והם רק כן, תראו את הדברים שעשיתם, את כל הדברים האלה אנחנו עשינו, ופתאום אתה מתמלא תקווה. אז זה בכלל עצה ככה לאקטיביסטים לעצור רגע ולהסתכל מה עשינו, אז תודה. בספר היה מרתק וכתבתי המון דברים עוד ועוד להגיד, וניסיתי בלילה באמת לצמצם, אז גם אם אני עוברת הזמן תעירו לי, אז ככה. אז קודם כל, אני מודה, כמו שהילד דיברה, על האפשרות לראות דרכים שונות לייצר תקווה, זה לגיטימי, ואין את נכון יותר או נכון ככה, וזה נורא מתאים לאיך שאני חושבת שגם אנחנו בנשים עושות שלום, והדיאלוג המתמשך הזה, אם עומדים ביחד, הוא תמיד מאתגר, כי כמובן שיהיה הסכמות, כי חלק מהדברים היפים באקטיביסטים זה שהם נורא בטוחים שמה שהם אומרים זה מה שצריך לעשות, כי אחרת הם לא היו עושים את זה ולא היו נותנים את כל הנשמה בשביל זה. אבל מה לעשות שיש מישהו שמדבר בדיוק על אותה מטרה, אבל הוא חושב לא בדיוק אותו דבר, וזה באמת, זה סוגיה, חבל שדני לא פה, הקשר בינינו כמובן עמוק ומאוד של הערכה, ויחד עם זה המון קונפליקטים במהלך הדרך. הם אומרים ככה, הם אומרים איפה שאין מאבק אין תקווה, ואנחנו שפה חיובית, בואו נדבר, נפתח לבבות, בואו נראה איך אנחנו מצליחים יחד להגיע לעוד קהלים. אז זה לא בדיוק אותה תיאוריית שינוי, אבל אנחנו בסופו של דבר רוצים להגיע לאותה מטרה, אז זה מאתגר. אז תודה ליב שבאמת אפשרת למגוון הזה, ואני חושבת שזה משהו בשבילנו, אני חושבת אולי לכולנו אפילו מין שיעור טוב כזה, כי אנחנו לפעמים יותר מדי יודעים בדיוק, וקצת קשה לנו לקבל מישהו שהוא טיפה אחרת. עכשיו, טוב, זה כבר אמרנו, גם פה אני רוצה להגיד תודה למקום הנפלא הזה שמייצר במה לשיח כל כך חשוב, והאפשרות באמת להיות חלק באוניברסיטה העברית זה חותמת. זאת אומרת שאנחנו לא כולנו הזויים, זאת אומרת שיש חוקרים ויש אנשים שבאמת יודעים שסכסוכים גדולים ומרים בעולם נפתרו, וזה יכול לקרות גם כאן, ובמיוחד כשנשים מעורבות. אז תודה על הבמה ותודה על האפשרות באמת להיות חלק מהדבר הזה, וגמרתי את הדברים של התודה, ואני רוצה עכשיו לספר לכם כמה דברים שהם יותר ברמה של הסיפור האישי התנועתי שלנו, אבל אני חושבת שהם רלוונטיים לנושא ההוא. אחר כך אני אדבר גם קצת יותר תיאורטי, אבל אני רוצה לספר לכם שהתחלנו את התנועה. הדבר הגדול הראשון שעשינו באופן מפתיע זה צעדת התקווה, כי מיד זיהינו שזה הדבר שנחוץ ושזה מה שאנחנו רוצות לייצר בעולם, וכל מיני חברות אמיצות אמרו, טוב, אז נלך מראש הנקרא לירושלים, הגיוני, נעשה את זה, וכך התחלנו. אבל לפני זה עוד, זה כבר היה 2 אחרי הקמת התנועה, חיפשנו להיעזר בכוחות, מאיפה נעצר את הדבר הזה. כבר אז המצב היה קשה, למרות שהמילים קשה כבר אי אפשר להגיד אותם, מי יכול היה לדמיין כמה קשה יהיה עכשיו, אבל הדבר הזה שאנחנו רוצים בתוך סיטואציה שהייתה מאתגרת ובהרבה מובנים מייאשת, איך לייצר תקווה. וחיפשנו במי אפשר להיעזר. ומצאנו את לימה בוי, שכל מי שקצת מיואש יעקוב אחריה ויראה את הסרט שלה, יש סרט על נשות ליבריה, שבתוך מלחמה הכי אכזרית שאפשר לדמיין בכלל, רצחו, אנסו, שחטו, שרפו כולם את כולם עם ילדים מכורים אלכוהוליסטים שקיבלו נשקים, ואנשים באו ואמרו די, והם הצליחו. עכשיו אנחנו את הסרט הזה לקחנו והקראנו אותו בעיניי מאות פעמים בכל רחבי הארץ, ולמדנו ממורים רבים בענייני תקווה שיש ערך דווקא להביט על אירוע אחר, על משהו שהוא לא אצלך, כי כשזה בפנים אז ככה אתה אומר לא אי אפשר, כן אפשר, אבל כשזה מרחוק זה משהו שאתה אומר וואי אולי זו אפשרות, ובאמת הדבר הזה פשוט עבד, היה לנו סדרה מאוד מסודרת של התהליך הזה שרואים את הסרט, ואחר כך הדיון שמתקיים בעקבותיו, וזה פשוט עבד, אנשים אמרו, רגע, גם אני רוצה, יש אפשרות לקחת חלק. אז כשהתחלנו את צעדת התקווה, אמרנו, את מי נביא שתיתן לנו תקווה? כמובן, את לימה בוי, זו הייתה משימה מאוד מורכבת, כי זה עלה הרבה מאוד כסף, היינו תנועה, בתחילת הדרך זה היה מאוד, ואמרנו, לא, זה חשוב שהיא תבוא. והאירוע הפתיחה היה בנווה שלום, וישבנו ככה כולנו, נשים שמצד אחד נורא רוצות להשפיע, מצד שני גם חרדות, האם נצליח ומה יהיה, היה לנו תוכניות גדולות לצעדה הזאת, ושתי חברות נסו להביא אותה משדה התעופה, וערב כבר והיא נכנסת לאולם שמה, ומתיישבת ככה לידי, ואני רואה אישה עייפה מאוד, אחרי טיסה, היא גם עם אמא שלה, אני אומרת, כמה תקווה תוכל לצמוח פה היום בערב, והיא ככה מנמנמת, ואני אומרת, מה יהיה? והיא עולה לבמה, ואומרת לנו את הנאום אחד המלהיבים והחזקים ששמעתי בחיי, אני חושבת כולנו נושאות את זה עמנו, והרגע הכי דרמטי היה, שהיא נעמדה ככה ואמרה, תקשיבו, לא יאומן, זה 10 שנים וזה עדיין, אני פשוט כל יום חוזרת לחוויה הזאת כדי, תכף תבינו למה, היא אמרה, תקשיבו, אתם לוקחות על עצמכם עכשיו את התפקיד הכי חשוב והכי אחראי, להרים את דגל התקווה, וזה תפקיד שאי אפשר להניח לו, ולתפקיד הזה שאתם לוקחות עכשיו יהיה מחירים גבוהים וגדולים יותר ממה שאתם מסוגלות לשער, ואסור לכן לוותר, ומי שלא מוכנה לוותר, מי שלא מוכנה לשלם את המחירים, עכשיו שתצא מהחדר. ככה היא אמרה לנו, ולא עזבנו. אני כל פעם, טוב, לא התכוונתי לבכות היום, זה היה הכל מתוכנן, די זה, אבל המקום הזה, אני יכולה להגיד באופן אישי, לא חלמתי גם מחירים אישיים, גם מחירים חברתיים, זה נורא נורא קשה, ואנחנו 12 שנים, ממשיכות ועושות את זה, כי הדבר הזה, שאני כל פעם אומרת, זה כמו שאתה מביא ילד לעולם, גם כשזה לא כל כך מצליח, זה הילד שלך, ואחריות, אני זוכרת, היינו מסתובבות בהפגנות, בימים הקשים, עם החטופים, בתוך כדי המלחמה וזה, ואנשים אמרו, תודה שאתם ממשיכות להחזיק את דגל התקווה. אז זה ככה, זה, וגם בהקשר של גם בהקשר של דבר מולי דבר בלי שאפשר תמיד לצפות את זה, שאלתי את לימה, בואי תגיד, מאיפה האנרגיה הזאת, מאיפה היכולת לעשות כזה מעשה אמיץ? אז היא אמרה, מנשים בשחור. אמרתי, נשים בשחור שכל כך הרבה מובנים מיואשות, כי לא הצליחו, והעשייה שלהם, הנחישות שלהם, המסירות שלהם, עוררה גלים, ואנחנו קיבלנו את הלפיד מ4 אמהות, ובזכות העבודה שלנו, אני מרשה עצמי להגיד, שקמה תנועת אחות פלסטינית, ונשות השמש, וכמה תנועה בצרפת, וכמה תנועה בשוודיה, ויש מעגלים, השלום עוד לא פה, לצערנו, הלוואי שכן, יגיע בקרוב, אבל כבר מעגלים ממשיכים בעקבות העשייה שלנו, ותקווה מולידה תקווה, לא יודעת אם דרך מאבק או דרך חיבוק, אבל תקווה מולידה תקווה, וזה היופי, כמו שייאוש הוא מדבק, לצערנו, התקווה היא מדבקת לגמרי, זה פשוט עובד, פוגשים אנשים והתקווה מתרוממת. עכשיו, קצת אני לא יודעת אם עדיין אגיד, אז אולי זה גם דוגמה ככה שאנחנו לא, עוד 5 דקות? בסדר, אז אני רק אגיד קצר, כי אני ממליצה מאוד על הספר הזה של אבי סגי על התקווה. מי שרוצה עוד קצת לדעת, אבי חבר וקר, הרבה שנים של שותפות, ואני מסתמכת עליו, אבל אני יודעת את זה גם במקומות אחרים, אבל יש אולי ניואנס אחר שאני רוצה להציע פה, להבחנה בין תקווה ואופטימיזם, כי לי הוא עוזר ביום יום, ואני אעשה את זה קצר, כי אני חושבת שיש בזה ערך למי שרוצה לפעול. אופטימיזם זה הדבר הנפלא הזה שאנשים מקבלים באיזשהו אופן, שהם אומרים שהכל יהיה בסדר. וכמו שנאמר בסרט ההודי החמוד הזה, ואם עוד לא בסדר, אז סימן שעוד לא הסוף, בסוף יהיה בסדר. ואיך זה יקרה, ומתי זה יקרה, ומה אתה בכלל, איך אתה מתמודד עם כל כך רע, בסוף יהיה בסדר. ויש בזה מצד אחד כנראה מאוד נחמד לחיות ככה, ואני חושבת שכל אחד מאיתנו לא היה מזיק אם היה לו קצת, אבל יש בזה משהו שהוא מאוד משאיר אותך מחוץ למציאות, כי יסתדר, אני רוצה להגיד אולי גם המשיח יבוא ויסתדר, אבל משהו יקרה שמה ויהיה בסדר. לעומת זאת, התקווה היא סיפור אחר לגמרי. התקווה זה משהו צומח מתוך הקושי, מתוך הייאוש, מתוך הניכור, מתוך התסכול והזעם הנורא, ואתה מביט על המציאות ואתה אומר, יש לי חלק פה, יש לי אחריות פה, ויש לי חירות לעשות את מה שאני חושב לנכון. שזה אקט הכי פנימי והכי עמוק, שאומר, אני בתוך המצב הקשה שיש פה, יודע שיש לי תפקיד. והדבר הכי קשה עם תקווה כמובן, זה שאין ביטוח. אין ביטוח שיהיה בסדר, ממש לא. ולי היה ריב גדול עם החברים שלי מהקואליציה הנהדרת של הגיע הזמן, אני מקווה שכולכם הייתם בכנס הנהדר שהיה ושעוד יהיו הלוואי, ועידת השלום העממית, שעלה הרעיון לקרוא לזה, זה הכרחי, זה אפשרי, זה יקרה. ואני צרחתי, זה לא מובטח שזה יקרה, אנחנו לא יכולים לקחת את הכותרת הזאת ולהגיד, זה יקרה, תראו איזה נשים נהדרות. ואמרתי, בואו נגיד, אם נעשה וזה תלוי בנו או משהו כזה שאומר זה, אמרו לי לא, זה נשמע טוב, ויתרתי רגע של הצילות בשביל הקואליציה, זה לא קל לייצר הסכמות של... אנחנו לדעתי כבר 70-80 איש, אבל אני אומרת, זה באמת המקום הזה שבאמת לא בטוח שיקרה. והייתה פה, אני לא יודעת אם עוד פה, בחורת בבוקר שאלה על איך אומרים לצעירים, אנחנו לא יכולים להבטיח להם. מה שאנחנו כן יכולים להבטיח לנו ולהם, זה שאנחנו נעשה את כל מה שאנחנו יכולים כדי שהמקום הזה יהיה טוב. ואני רוצה לספר לכם על משהו עוד לא היה בספר, כי זה קרה אחרי 7 באוקטובר ולא דיברנו, אבל בשבילי היה בהקשר של תקווה אקט מאוד מאוד מפתיע ומחזק. יש לנו את השותפות עם נשות השמש, שזה גם נס בפני עצמו, כי יש תנועה פלסטינית שאימצה את השפה שלנו בעשיית שלום, וזה, לפעמים אני נדהמת, אומרים רגע, לא, זה בלי, לא בליימינג, לא שיימינג, ובואו נחבר ולדבר עם כל הקהילות, ויש לנו שיח מאוד עמוק ומאתגר בשתי החברות, וב4 באוקטובר פה, קרן סיפרה שהיא ראתה פה את דפק לה הלב, איך ירדנו לים המלח מירושלים, ועשינו פה ב4 באוקטובר עם ויויאן ועם כולם, 1,500 נשים ישראליות ופלסטיניות, ואמרנו, תקשיבו לקריאת האימהות, והרגשנו שהנה, מגיע רגע שצריך לזעוק את זעקתנו, וב7 באוקטובר, נגמרו המילים להגיד מה זה עשה לכולנו, בצהריים כותבת לי רים חג'אג' שהיא המייסדת והמנהיגה של נשות השמש, שעמדה איתנו בים המלח ואמרה, חייבים לפתור את הסכסוך הזה, הקיצוניים מתחזקים משני הצדדים, זה לא יכול להיות, זה פצצת זמן. כותבת לי ואומרת, איפה ויויאן? מה אפשר לעזור? מי יודע? מה קורה פה? ואז היא כותבת לי, מה שקורה עכשיו רק אומר שאנחנו צריכים לפעול יותר באומץ, יותר בעוצמה, יותר בכוח, כי זה התפקיד שלנו למרות מה שקורה. ויש לברנר שאומר, ואף על פי כן, כאילו, ואף על פי כן הזה שאנחנו חייבים. ובשבילי באופן אישי זה היה הרגע שאפשר לי לעבור את הדבר הנורא הזה. כי אני אומרת, עם הפלסטיניות, אף אחד לא היה מושג בכלל מה מחכה לנו, אבל אם אנחנו יחד, נשים ישראליות ופלסטיניות, בתוך המציאות הנוראית הזאת, עובדות יחד, אז זה נקרא לעשות את מה שכתוב בספר שלי, וזה אומר לייצר את התקווה ממש ממש. וזה מה שאנחנו עושות בשלוש שנים האחרונות. והעניין הזה, המוטיב של התקווה, הוא עכשיו מקבל מה שאמרתי קודם, כתיאוריה, שהוא בא מתוך כאב, ושהוא כל כך קשה, הוא מקבל עכשיו צעדנו ברומא לפני 3 חודשים, יחפות, כי רים אמרה, אנחנו חייבות מתוך הכאב של להרגיש את האדמה הספוגה בדם, ממנה, מהאדמה העצובה והכואבת הזאת, אנחנו רוצות להביא תקווה, זאת אומרת, החיבור לתוך הכאב וממנו האחריות, זה החיבור שיש לנו, והמסר הזה הגיע, 1,000 אנשים צעדו איתנו, 40 מקומות בכל העולם, ועכשיו אנחנו רוצות לקחת את הכוח הזה, ולייצר איתו גם עם השפה המיוחדת הזאת שמביטה קדימה, שמחברת קולות נשיים, גברים מוזמנים לבוא ולתמוך, לייצר קואליציה אזורית של נשים. אנחנו מבינות שהסכסוך הישראלי-פלסטיני הוא, זה נפלדת להגיד מצוין באנגלית, key factor ליציבות באזור, ואנחנו רוצים את החיבור הזה שנשמיע קול ונגיד כן, אפשר לעשות שלום, במיוחד כשנשים מעורבות. אבל יש לי עוד 2 משפטים, בסדר? אני הבאתי פה עוד ספר שהולך איתי לכל מקום, הוצאתי מתיק, אמרתי, תקחי גם את זה. הספר הזה כתוב עליו, משברי לב ותקוות. אבל, טוב, פה זה קריאת האימהות כמובן, אם מישהו ירצה, זה הולך איתי. פה כתוב אישי, תקוות ומשברי לב, מחוק, וכתוב משברי לב ותקוות. זו המעטפה שמצאנו אחרי שאמא שלי נפטרה, אחרי שאח שלי נהרג, שהיא כל כך הייתה עצובה, וזה מה שהיא השאירה לנו. מתוך משברי הלב להביא תקוות. אז תודה שאתם מאפשרים לנו עם המחקר החשוב הזה ועם ההתכנסות החשובה הזאת, מתוך משברי הלב של כולנו להביא תקווה חדשה.
Amen. Thank you very much. Finally, we have the Kalat Hairua, Dr. Liv Halperin, who's currently a research fellow at the Leonard Davis Institute for International Relations at Hebrew University and a senior advisor at Peace Women across the globe in Switzerland. Congratulations on the book again, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to discuss it together.
So I prepared a huge presentation with 40 slides, which is exactly what we don't do in this kind of workshop, so I'm not going to use it. It's there if you have any question, because this is more of a conversation about the book, and whoever is interested can read the book. It's an academic book, so some parts are more accessible and some are more technical. I think very globally, my perspective here, my desire was to show the work of amazing activists who still believe that a change is possible. So I have young kids. I'm trying to imagine a future that's different. And I think what I share with all the activists here is the idea that agency and being able to do something is what will take you closer to that reality. So the book is really a tribute to men and women who get away from their usual duties to actually try and make a change in different ways. And I have to say, even though the Israeli context is a bit different, maybe than other contexts I've been working in, this choice is a difficult choice, it's time consuming also, but it's also risky reputation-wise, and for some people it can be threatening as well. So the first thing I really wanted to achieve is give visibility to activism, and I think by that I've achieved that. I can go home. It's fine. I'm happy about this part of the story. So thank you first of all to all the activists who opened their hearts and their homes. I had a wonderful journey. I could meet people in their own houses from Standing Together, from Women with Trees. So the best PhD, the best people suffer from their PhD. I had the greatest PhD. And then COVID arrived. So COVID actually made my life a bit more difficult because I couldn't get to the people, but I was almost done with my interviews. So a few of you have also interviewed online, which made it easier, but very frustrating because I like to know the people and go to their home and really talk. And so on that academic journey that ended up with a book, I had COVID, 4 national elections, a US president, a horrible US president that disappeared and reappeared, an Israeli prime minister who all of a sudden, for the first time in our short political existence, disappeared for a year and reappeared as well. And then there were Abraham Accords that were bizarre and controversial, where suddenly Israelis could travel to the Emirates. All those things happened in the time of the PhD. And I finished the PhD in 2022. So a year before the October event. So I thought, when I actually wrote the introduction of the book, I thought all of what I told you here is exciting enough for a PhD, and then later on, other things happen. So I'll get to that in a second. But first of all, thank you very much for this occasion. So Tal, putting up all this incredible panel and having everybody around, and all of you for coming here. It's really an honor. Not taking for granted. The view reminds us of the reality. Everybody here wants to make it different. So thank you for organizing, Tal. Thank you to Galia is Galia back? She is back. Thank you for supporting and for the postdoc opportunity at Hebrew University and the continuous support until today. And then thank you for 2 wonderful supervisors I've had. Because the other thing people told me is PhDs are long, unbearable, and advisors are never accessible. And try and pick some good ones, but forget about having nice people. So I had 2 amazing supervisors. Ariel is here today. Enjoyed every part of it, learned continuously, and followed really the guidance of making the PhD last. Yael told me not more than 4 years, 3.5 years, done. But then after I was finished, I thought maybe that's just not enough, because there are things I gave visibility to some activists, but really it's going to stay in a library, in a book, in a university library, because who reads a PhD? Honestly, 4, 5 people. My dad, maybe, my best friends, nobody reads a PhD. So then I thought maybe a little bit more of an effort to have it published as a book, and then I can get a bit more exposure. It's also good career-wise, of course, but it mostly gives a bit more exposure to all of us here and to the activism, to be even talked about and referred to and give ideas in other places. I'll come back to that in a second. The condition for publishing the book by Routledge, which is a relatively big commercial editing house, is you cannot be an Israeli scholar today and not talk about October 2023. Yeah, but my data is from before. It doesn't matter. If you want to publish today, you need to review your data. And so I had to accept the condition and look at what happened after October 7th, and whether my thesis, which is that movements can trigger hope in different ways and in different styles, and do it even in a protracted conflict. It becomes an end in and of itself. I had to prove that this was even true after October 7th. So there I was, already moved from here to Switzerland for other reasons with young children, trying to figure out what happened to women, wage, peace, and Standing Together after October 7th, and whether they were still triggering hope. And it's no spoiler, they are. So I actually had a possibility to test every one of my theories post-October 7 and publish the book then on the basis of the conclusion that hope is actually still being produced together, Jews and Arabs, Palestinians and Israelis, by women or mixed, depending on the different styles, even in the worst of Israel's history and in the worst of Palestinian history, as a matter of fact. I also forgot to say that during the years of my PhD, there were numerous wars, and of course, different wars with Gaza, and then Iran arrived as well. And so I always kept on thinking, should I be doing something about that as well? But this field is never stopping. So at some point you need to stop the analysis somewhere. That's where it stops for me. So that is the contribution. The main contribution I hope to be making is to give visibility to all the work you've all been doing here. Maybe one of the contribution of the book that I'm quite proud of is that I think, I'm not quite 100% sure, I think it's the first book that's actually a full book published on women, wage, peace, and standing together. And there's a few academic papers, but it's still very recent. So it's a pleasure for me to be able to give visibility to movements that have really only just started, if you take a historical perspective, which is nice and inspiring for people. That's probably one of the book's contribution, and there are also a few theoretical contributions that Ayelet already referred to. I won't bore you with that have to do with the field of social movement studies and emotions, the sociology of emotions. Interestingly, when you publish a book and even academic papers, there are a few points that remain in people's memory that you could never have imagined before. And for me, the point that actually got the most attention is emotions, and this difference between using positive and positive emotions. So one of my argument goes, women, wage, peace, they trigger hope in different ways, all kinds of strategies, including how Yael is doing it today by showing us that things can be different, by talking about Northern Ireland, by bringing women together. But they do that at the same time as they trigger other positive emotions. So I call it positive. Love or joy or care. It's not really an emotion, but love or joy. And the combination with hope. And standing together, they combine hope. They also really, really actively work to actually trigger hope. It doesn't come by mistake. It's a strategy. It's a work. There's a methodology there. There's a theory of change of standing together, a written theory of change that talks about the politics of hope. But they do it on the side of actually triggering anger. They really want people to come to demonstration angry and to mix the anger with hope for motivation to be there and maximum impact to happen. And this comparison between plus minus, the plus minus is what we call the moral battery in academic terms, which I haven't invented. It's a theory that exists. Plus versus plus minus is a real choice. And some people have started reading my article or the book and looking around and going to demonstration and figuring, is this a plus or is this a plus minus situation we have here, which I found, I thought it was one of 10 findings, but actually it's the one that talks most to people. So I have people who now are writing to me that they're activists, had an email from an activist in Spain. And she said, it's really funny now I have your hope thing in the head and the plus and the plus minus, and I can adapt it. So this really also, I think, is a contribution of the papers that came before the book and now the book, that it's beyond Israel-Palestine and it's beyond women, wage, peace and standing together. It's also about giving tools to movement to actually rely on in their work, which I'm really happy about. And by the way, an anecdote is that the title of the book was not meant to be that one, of course, that was imposed by Routledge, because I wanted to give visibility to standing together in women, wage, peace. So my title was, I can't remember exactly, but Triggering Hope in Times of Crisis, the work of women, wage, peace and standing together, something like that. It was denied by the editor because really, who knows about women, wage, peace and standing together? It's more global. It's about peace politics, collective peace politics. I had to accept, but I had a heavy heart because now some people, maybe the few people that would see it in a bookstore would not necessarily know that it's about women, wage, peace and standing together. But if it's for the good of having a larger impact and people being able to recognize themselves in the book, then I'm happy. I'm happy as well. I'm very happy that Radir was here to present her book before me, because when her book was, first of all, Radir has always been a complicit in my work. I've interviewed her numerous times. I've been with her on the field. She incarnates hope herself. And I found it very interesting to see that she decided then to produce a book on hope, collecting stories that are very much the stories that I have in my academic work. And I have a lot of quotes that are similar to Gadir's hope actually in my own book. I have the similar report, but I found it interesting that she decided to do that because it was really a proof of my theory in a way. One of the ways of producing hope is to talk about hope. The book is a bit of a proof of one of the ways that you can actually produce hope. So I was happy to have the opportunity to have her here, and she incarnated hope. And of course, the other example that actually maybe doesn't prove me right, but shows a continuation, is the new political party that was created on the politics of hope now, and that actually runs on a platform. Political hope. So my study is really on social movements and running on politics of hope, but now it's actually about running a political party, which I'm really curious to know about. And some people said it should be an added paragraph or an added chapter to a future book that I don't think I will ever write, but as to keep us in mind. So there's so many things I could say about the book. There were questions about radical hope, and there were questions about we can call things differently, intersectional. For me, mostly what is interesting is that there are different ways of showing hope, of triggering hope. And as one of the, maybe I can, if I'd like to put one quote here. As all of you know, Dov Hanin, I think Dov Hanin is one of the founders of Standing Together. He's also quite active with women or supporting women with peace in the work he's doing. So Dov Hanin tells us that we should not stay at hope. We can't let despair stay at hope. And be mind of what date we're talking about. It's 2019. He said instead of shutting down, disengaging, rebuking the people or condemning it, it is important now that to do the opposite, to organize, to act together, and to begin to create hope. And really, what I've shown in this work is that both movements find a different way to do that. I have many quotes also of women with peace activists using the word hope, but it would take too long to put it here now. But maybe I'll just conclude by saying something very nice that I also heard from a few different activists is that it's not about showing the best way of doing it. It's about showing that there are many different ways of doing it. And I think it was Dov also who had this metaphor of an orchestra or a choir, and you have different songs and different melodies in a choir, or different instruments. And they're all needed for the common goal of mobilizing Israeli society to fight apathy. A few of the speakers this morning talked about apathy. And one speaker said, even in times of great challenges, there is no apathy on Otef Aza. And I wanted to tell her, there is no apathy exactly in Otef Aza, because it's a very specific population. But I think most Israelis are indifferent or don't fight to change the situation. So I think I think more globally, there is really something to be said about having now to fight against this apathy. If we want to ever get to a situation where we can raise our children in security, no need for that to be proven. But the way to do it is to create hope and get people out and motivate people to risk their time and their sometimes even their life to do that. And I've shown here in the book 2 different ways of doing it, and there are probably 20 different ways of doing it. Maybe I should just add a word on gender, because this is the Sophi Davis Forum of Gender and Conflict Resolution and Peace. Of course, I'm a feminist scholar, of course, and I also add to the book and to the PhD more generally a gendered approach, comparative approach that was interesting to me to see how actually a movement led by women might do things differently than a mixed movement. And it was very, very interesting to realize during the book writing that women with peace is mostly led by women, but not necessarily feminist movement. And it became more feminist with time, but not necessarily. It's not an openly feminist movement, whereas Standing Together is a mixed movement, but is openly feminist. So we also should be, in our own research, be aware of binarities and putting too quickly etiquettes on different groups. There is an interesting variety and a mixture of ideologies in both movements. And it was interesting for me to look at the movement from that perspective also. What is it about a woman movement that does it differently? What can we learn from that? And I think there's a lot that we could learn about empathy, caring, bridging. And maybe I'll say just one last word. I'm now working in an organization called a feminist organization in Switzerland that works with peace-building activists in different places. And I got to present that research to Sudanese colleagues recently. So I was visiting, and they're working now in times of great despair in Sudan, women groups. And I presented that research to them because they also have different ideologies, and some of them are feminist and some of them are mixed. It's a bit of a, I don't want to say similar, but there are similarities. And it was very interesting that actually for Sudanese women, it was the first time they actually got to speak to an Israeli scholar. And at first they thought she won't dare coming up and talking about Israeli activists, because today it's difficult to be Israeli and talking about Israeli activists because Israel is in a difficult situation. But I said, of course I'll dare. It's about women. It's about activism. It's about hope. I have no problem. And then we engaged a discussion, and it was very positive discussions. I think this book can also serve a bit to bridge in difficult times. It's not easy to be an Israeli scholar at the moment, as you all know. Been banned from workshops, papers being taken out of review. So I do hope that by bringing also a message of resistance to what's happening, I have a little contribution in also, not Tasbara, that's not my struggle in life, but giving justice to the fact that Israel is a mosaic of different types of people. We're not all behind the current regime. Some of us actually are trying to make it better, juster, and this is my contribution, small contribution to that fight. So thank you very much.
Stay up here and we'll see if there's questions or comments.
Yeah, sure.
So we have around 15 minutes left.
So should
and,
everybody have the floor? Just
I don't know, maybe I think no, we're good. And so I wanted to invite if anyone had questions or thoughts or comments to share. Now is the time. Leaf is here and others are scattered throughout the room.
Hello, my name is Sophie Sheehan. I research social innovation in times of crisis. So my question is, you talk about triggering hope. What does hope trigger?
okay, that is a little bit what was referred to by Danny Filk in this, like, I always had this struggle during my PhD because there's like struggles. איפה שיש מאבק יש תקווה. So where there is struggle, there is hope. So struggle triggers hope, and not only struggle, collectivity and working together as a circle of women, for example, and showing positive example. All of this triggers hope, and hope triggers activism, engagement. So I think that's a little bit of the circle we were looking at. Without hope, people won't get out of bed and go and be active. That's what I heard from most people. But there was an element of, I don't know how you say, tautology, like inherent element of tautology that wanted me to actually leave that subject many times and choose another PhD because hope is a bit of an issue. It's a philosophical concept, a psychological concept. It has dozens of different definitions, and they're like that's what they do to themselves. You need hope. So many activists told me you need hope to breathe. They need hope to get out. Without hope, they wouldn't do anything, because if you don't think that change is possible, then there's no point in getting up. But hope, it's a circle. But hope then triggers activism. That actually triggers hope, and it's like self-maintaining systems. That is why I really do believe that movement have to have a really benefit from having a strategy on how they want to create that hope with different audiences, of course. I don't think you create hope in the same way if you go work with youth in distress in different areas, or work with women of a certain age, or if it's a mix. You need to have a proper strategy, which is what both movements have in different ways. Standing Together has a strategy. They write their strategy. They have a theory of change written. They have point one. We trigger hope. Literally, I have it here somewhere. So it's Standing Together is almost like a school case of how a movement should be triggering hope. Women WHP doesn't, but Women WHP has been using the word hope from day one, like the journey of hope. So that's in the beginning when I started talking to activists and people who had actually leading position in the movement. I told them, "What's the story?" Huh? על שינוי, על תקווה.
תיאוריית השינוי.
Later. Yeah. So theory, you had it.
בחרנו בהתחלה, היו כדי, יש לנו נושא בהתחלה, היו כדי לייצר את השינוי.
את השינוי, אבל לא את התקווה בהתחלה. There was actually, I looked at the 10 founding principles of women with peace in the beginning, and then they evolved. And if you read in the different executive committee decisions, etc., they evolved. And hope was added as in the second part of a sentence later on. So it's not that it's not there in written hope, but it's not that in the very beginning of the movement said first hope. And then there are some activists that actually said at some point I felt that we were looking for hope rather than peace, which is another issue. Because here Adina today told us that for her hope is peace, but the equation is not that direct. Some women with peace has been accused a few times of actually trying to trigger hope rather than to fight for peace. That was another thing that I heard many people say. It's nice because actually when I do activism with women with peace, I really feel hope. So as a person, I feel hope, I feel better. Yes, and then some people said, yeah, but that's wonderful. But how does this bring us peace? And in my theory, it goes together, because to keep people active and fighting for that peace, you need the hope. And so for some people, hope is an objective in and of itself. I think we can all understand that. But for many, it's what's going to lead us then to the final objective, which is to have peace.
I might ask a question then, which is that I wondered if in your field work or maybe later you found like crises of hope among activists or within movements, and how do they sort of, or are they kind of like the hopeful few that are able to propel the public?
I think crisis of hope is on a daily basis and in all those movements, because really there's more reason to despair than to hope.
Right.
Rather, it's with the colleagues. Now I have literally colleagues I'm working with in Ukraine, with like 10 million displaced people and half of the country occupied, and in Sudan, and in Colombia, where they just had the worst elections in their whole history. It was like 250,000 people decided on the fate of a country, from extreme right to actual experienced left. They chose Trump in Colombia and defeated years of peace work. So I think all the movements I talk to have millions of reasons to lose hope on a daily basis. And one of the things that keeps them being active is the togetherness, and being together. So when you feel like nothing is really gonna go in your own direction, I think the feeling of being together, belonging to something you can connect with, having the impression that you're not alone, whether it's within women groups or whether it's standing together, which has a very more dogmatic sort of philosophy and approach. Feeling that there are other people that think the way you are is already the first step to hope, I think. And then you have the role also of hopeful leaders. So, for example, you refer to Lima, who came from Liberia. So she's an example of that. I mean, it's a good strategy to bring those women or charismatic leaders who actually bring back hope even when there's no hope. Dov Hanin, I think, plays this role in Israel all the time. I mean, when I'm down, I just go on internet and look for Dov Hanin, and I'm good again. So I think we all find the ways, the leaders, the examples, the good success stories that actually work. But yes, I think there are more, like in the group I work with, there are more reasons to despair than to hope. But this being together definitely, and feeling that you're not alone is probably the center of bringing the hope back, even on a small basis every day. Yes?
Liv, I wanted to ask you, since this is an academic book,
yes.
And this, we have here the practitioners, women, wage, peace. Tamara wrote that book about the peace Israeli movement, and she said that they fell in the sense that it became part of the discourse to talk about two-state solution. Talking about your book, would you consider, how would you assess, and this is a difficult question for you, in terms of success, which is different. Here, the hope, emotions, did the two movements that you studied, did they succeed? Work in progress in terms, and it's very difficult to assess success or failure, but whether
social movement studies rejects the idea that you have to be looking at successes in that sense. But of course, I think both succeed. Wonderful. I mean, if you ask me, I think both are succeeding in different ways. I mean, women in peace is smaller than what it would want to be, right? It's like it started very big, but there are a few hundreds or a few thousand people. So you want to be bigger, but still it resonates around the world. So it's very visible. Standing together, managed to mobilize university students in a really unprecedented ways. They're very coherent. They start to be very known. They now launch, whether or not people agree that it's a good idea, they're launching their own political parties. So I think both are success. The fact that they exist 10 years later is both. It's two things, because women with peace was supposed to disappear after 4 years. Right? That was the idea in the beginning. We exist today. In 4 years, we will disappear. We won't be needed anymore. If that's about success, then no. We have women. It hasn't brought a mutual satisfactory agreement with the Palestinians, and standing together is far from having changed Israeli society to a more just society right now. But both, I think, have made the foundations and the seeds that we talked about for what is needed later. Now there are lots of people who have been exposed to other narratives, who have other ideas, who know that other people think the same way. There are networks that have been created to help each other. So I think the seeds are there, and the two movements still exist, and they're high and running. So in terms of social movements or peace movement, it's a huge success, but it's not the success of having brought peace.
Not yet.
Huh?
Not yet.
Not yet. Yeah. Not yet. But, yeah. Yeah. No, I know. Yeah, I mean, in the darkest of time, there was the Egyptian war to get a peace agreement with Egypt. So now is maybe the time, with imperfect ways, very imperfect leaders, very bizarre moderators, and still that might be the way. I mean, whatever agreement we get now, I mean, we all are great at criticizing, and it's not the right agreement, and we don't like this article and whatever, but we want, at the end of the day, something that takes us in the right direction, and something that alleviates the suffering now, because that is what we're talking about. The suffering is ongoing, so any stop of that suffering is a success in that sense. And then we'll build, and then we will forget one day that there was all this way, because like the Good Friday agreement, or like the Egyptian agreement that nobody thought was going to happen. Same will happen with the Palestinians. Tomorrow with Lebanon, after tomorrow with Syria. Yesterday, yes, but
work in progress.
Work in progress.
So I think you leave us with some hope.
I hope.
Which is a great way to end.